I found the listing 3 weeks before our trip. The photos looked perfect. A rustic cabin nestled in the mountains, complete with a stone fireplace and wraparound porch. The price was almost too good to be true, but the reviews were glowing. "Peaceful retreat," one said. "Exactly what we needed," said another. I found the listing 3 weeks before our trip. The photos looked perfect. A rustic cabin nestled in the mountains, complete with a stone fireplace and wraparound porch. The price was almost too good to be true, but the reviews were glowing. "Peaceful retreat," one said. "Exactly what we needed," said another. My girlfriend Sarah and I had been planning this summer getaway for months. When I showed her the listing, her eyes lit up. "It's perfect, Marcus. Book it." The drive up took 4 hours through winding mountain roads. Cell service disappeared around mile marker 47, but we didn't mind. Sarah dozed against the window as pine trees blurred past. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by towering evergreens. It looked exactly like the photos. The key was under the mat, just as promised. Inside, everything was immaculate. Hand-carved furniture, Native American rugs, and the smell of cedar. There was a guest book on the coffee table, filled with entries from previous visitors. I flipped through it while Sarah unpacked. "Listen to this," I called out. "The Henderson family writes, 'Thank you for the most relaxing vacation we've ever had. The kids loved exploring the woods, and we felt so safe and secluded.'" Sarah smiled from the bedroom doorway. "See? I told you this place was special." The first few days were everything we'd hoped for. We hiked during the day, cooked simple meals in the evening, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets. It was on the 4th night that I noticed something odd about the guest book. Every entry was written in the same handwriting. Different names, different dates spanning years, but the same careful cursive script. The Hendersons, the Johnsons, elderly couples, young families, all supposedly different people, but all writing with identical loops and flourishes. I showed Sarah, but she just shrugged. Maybe the owner writes them himself to make the place seem more popular. I wanted to believe her, but something felt wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to fake reviews? Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps circling the cabin. I nudged Sarah awake, but she was groggy and insisted it was probably just an animal. The footsteps stopped, and eventually, I drifted off. The next morning, I found fresh boot prints in the dirt around the cabin. Human prints, size 11 or 12, walking in a perfect circle around the building. "Sarah, we need to leave," I said over breakfast. She looked at me like I was losing my mind. "Because of some footprints? Marcus, this is the mountains. People hike through here all the time." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The peaceful isolation that had felt so romantic now felt threatening. On our last night, I decided to stay awake and keep watch. Sarah thought I was being paranoid, but she didn't try to stop me. I positioned myself by the living room window with a clear view of the driveway and surrounding woods. At 1:30 a.m., I saw a figure emerge from the trees. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing dark clothing. He moved with the same deliberate pace I'd heard on the porch, but instead of circling the cabin, he walked straight to the front door and knocked. 3 soft knocks. My heart hammered as I crept to the door. Through the peephole, I could see him standing there, perfectly still, facing the door. His face was obscured by shadows, but something about his posture seemed almost expectant. I didn't answer. After what felt like forever, he turned and walked back into the woods. The next morning, I found a note slipped under the door. It was written in the same handwriting as all the guest book entries. "Thank you for staying at our cabin. Please leave a review in the guest book before you go. We hope you felt safe and secluded during your visit." I showed it to Sarah, and for the first time, she looked genuinely frightened. We packed in silence and left within the hour. As we drove down the mountain, Sarah kept looking back through the rear window. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I just realized something about those guest book entries. They all mention feeling safe and secluded. Those exact words. Every single one." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking those aren't fake reviews. I think they're real entries from real people who stayed there. But I don't think they all wrote them." We drove the rest of the way in silence, both of us thinking the same thing, but neither wanting to say it out loud. When we got home, I tried to find the listing again, but it had been removed from the site. I called the rental company, but they had no record of the cabin or the owner. 3 weeks later, I saw a news report about a couple who had gone missing during a mountain vacation. The photo showed them smiling at a rustic cabin with a wraparound porch. In the background, barely visible, was a guest book on the coffee table. I recognized the handwriting in the missing persons report. The husband had supposedly sent a final text to his family. "Having a wonderful time. Feel so safe and secluded up here." But I knew he hadn't written those words. The road stretched endlessly ahead, shimmering in the afternoon heat. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, making my way to Colorado for what was supposed to be the best summer of my life. My ancient Honda was running hot. The air conditioning had died, and I was questioning every decision that had led me to this moment. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the shoulder, thumb out, long dark hair whipping in the wind. As I got closer, I could see she was probably around my age, maybe 22, wearing a sundress and carrying a small backpack. I'd never picked up a hitchhiker before. My mum had drilled it into me since I was old enough to drive. Never pick up strangers, Jenny. But something about her seemed different. Maybe it was the isolation of the highway. Whatever it was, I found myself pulling over. "Need a ride?" I called through the passenger window. She smiled and her whole face lit up. "That would be amazing. Thank you so much." Her name was Alice, and she was heading to Denver. She'd been traveling for 3 days, making her way from California to visit her sister. "I usually don't hitchhike," she said, settling into the passenger seat. "But my car broke down in Utah, and I've been kind of stuck. People have been really kind though. This is exactly what I needed." We talked easily as the miles passed. She was funny and smart, asking about my plans in Colorado and sharing stories from her journey. There was something almost hypnotic about her voice. "You know," she said as we passed through a small town, "I've always believed that the people who stop to help strangers are the ones who make the world worth living in." I blushed. "I'm just going that way anyway." "Still, you didn't have to stop. Most people wouldn't." The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Alice had fallen quiet, staring out the window at the passing landscape. I found myself stealing glances at her profile. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. "Of course." "Earlier, you said this was exactly what you needed. What did you mean?" She turned to look at me, and for a moment, her expression was completely unreadable. "I mean a ride. This ride with you." "Right, but the way you said it. Sometimes the universe provides exactly what we need, when we need it, don't you think?" There was something in her tone that made me uncomfortable. As darkness fell, Alice asked if I minded if she slept for a while. "I haven't had much rest the past few days," she explained. "Of course, we've still got a couple hours to go." She curled up against the window, using her backpack as a pillow. Within minutes, she was breathing deeply and evenly. I turned the radio down and settled in for the night drive. It was around 10 p.m. when I started to notice things that didn't make sense. First, it was the complete absence of other cars. The highway had been busy during the day, but now it was like we were the only people left in the world. Then I realized I hadn't seen an exit sign in over an hour, which seemed impossible. I reached for the radio to check for traffic reports, but all I got was static. Every station, just white noise. That's when I looked at the odometer and felt my blood turn cold. When I'd picked up Alice, I'd been at 127,000 miles. Now, after driving for 4 hours, it still read 127,000 miles. Exactly. "Alice, hey, Alice." She didn't respond. I shook her harder. "Alice." Her body felt cold through the thin fabric of her dress. Panic rising in my chest, I pulled over to the shoulder and turned on the interior light. Alice was staring straight ahead with glassy, unfocused eyes. Her skin was pale, almost grey, and when I touched her arm, it felt like ice. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal. The screen showed no bars, no carrier name, just an empty display. That's when I noticed the smell. It was subtle at first, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. But it was getting stronger, sweet and cloying and unmistakably wrong. I grabbed Alice's backpack and unzipped it with trembling hands. Inside, there were no clothes, no personal items, just newspaper clippings, dozens of them, all yellowed with age. Local woman dies in highway accident. Body found after 3-day search. Family seeks closure in unsolved case. Every article was about Alice. Alice Morrison, 22, who had died in a car accident on this very stretch of highway 3 years ago. I looked up at her still form in the passenger seat, and slowly she turned her head toward me. Her eyes were completely black now, and when she smiled, I could see that her teeth were stained with something dark. "Thank you," she whispered in that same calm, measured voice. "This is exactly what I needed." I ran. I left the car running, door open, and ran into the darkness. Behind me, I could hear her laughing, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. When the police found me the next morning, I was walking along the highway in a state of shock. My car was parked neatly at a rest stop 50 miles back, keys in the ignition, no sign of any passenger. The officer who picked me up was kind, but skeptical. "You sure you didn't just fall asleep at the wheel? Highway hypnosis can make people think all sorts of things." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe it was all a hallucination, brought on by exhaustion and stress. But when I got my car back, I found something in the glove compartment that hadn't been there before. A newspaper clipping, crisp and new, dated that morning. Driver survives mysterious highway incident. At the bottom, in faded ink that looked like it had been there for years, someone had written, "Thank you for the ride. A.M." I never made it to Colorado. I turned around and drove straight home, sold my car, and took a job in my hometown. I don't drive long distances anymore, and I've never picked up another hitchhiker. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that voice on the wind. This is exactly what I needed. And I know she's still out there, waiting for the next kind stranger to stop. I was 17 when I applied to be a counselor at Camp Whispering Pines. The pay was terrible, but it was a chance to spend my last summer before college in the mountains. The camp was about 3 hours north of the city, nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forest. When I arrived for counselor training, I was struck by how isolated it felt. No cell service, no internet, just endless trees and the sound of wind through the pines. The head counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been running the camp for over 2 decades. During orientation, she went through the usual safety protocols. Buddy system, no one goes into the woods alone, lights out by 10 p.m. One more thing, she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Under no circumstances are you to take campers to the old cabin on the North Trail. It's structurally unsound and off limits. I raised my hand. What cabin? About 2 miles up the North Trail, there's an old ranger station that's been abandoned for years. The kids always want to explore it, but it's dangerous. Just keep them away from that area entirely. The other counselors nodded like they'd heard this speech before, but I was new and curious. After orientation, I asked Jake, a veteran counselor, about the cabin. "Oh, that place gives me the creeps," he said. "I hiked up there last summer just to see what the fuss was about. It's not that run down, honestly, but there's something off about it. The windows are all boarded up from the inside." The campers arrived the next day. 40 kids between 8 and 14, all excited for their week in the mountains. I was assigned to the 12-year-old boys' cabin, and they were exactly what you'd expect. Loud, energetic, and constantly testing boundaries. For the first 3 days, everything went smoothly. We hiked, played games, told stories around the campfire. The kids were having a blast. Then Tommy Chen disappeared. It was during rest hour on Wednesday afternoon. I had stepped out of the cabin for maybe 5 minutes to grab supplies. When I came back, Tommy's bunk was empty. The other boys said he'd gone to the bathroom, but he wasn't there. We searched the entire camp, calling his name, organizing search parties. Mrs. Rodriguez contacted the rangers, and within an hour, there were dozens of people combing the forest. It was Jake who found him, just as the sun was setting. Tommy was sitting on a log about half a mile up the North Trail, completely unharmed, but staring off into the distance with a strange expression. "Tommy," I called out, running toward him. "Thank God, we've been looking everywhere for you." He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Oh, hi Connor. What happened? Why did you leave camp?" I heard someone calling my name, a lady's voice. She said she needed help. My blood ran cold. "What lady?" "I don't know. I followed her voice up the trail, but then I couldn't find her, so I sat down to wait. Jake and I exchanged glances. There were no female staff members at camp, and we were miles from any other people. "Tommy, there's no lady up here," I said gently. "You probably just heard the wind in the trees." He shook his head firmly. "No, it was a lady. She was really sad. She kept saying, 'Help me,' and 'Please come find me.' She sounded like she was crying." That night, Mrs. Rodriguez called Tommy's parents and recommended they pick him up early. She said he'd had a minor incident, but was fine. Tommy didn't want to leave, insisting he needed to help the sad lady. 2 days later, it happened again. This time it was Emma, a quiet 10-year-old from the girls' cabin. She wandered off during arts and crafts, and we found her in the exact same spot where Tommy had been sitting. "The lady asked me to come help her," Emma said. "She said she was lost and needed someone to show her the way home." "What did she look like?" I asked. Emma thought for a moment. "I never saw her, but she sounded young, like a teenager, and really, really sad." 2 more kids disappeared over the next 2 days, always during quiet activities when counselors might step away for a moment. Each time, they were found on the North Trail, claiming they'd heard a woman's voice calling for help. Mrs. Rodriguez was getting frantic. "This has never happened before," she told the staff during an emergency meeting. 40 years I've been working with kids, and I've never seen anything like this." "Maybe we should move the camp," suggested Sarah, one of the girls' counselors. "This is getting dangerous." "We can't just abandon the session. These families paid good money, and we only have 2 days left." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Jake had said about the old cabin, about the boarded up windows and the strange feeling in the air. All the kids had been found on the North Trail, the same trail that led to the abandoned ranger station. Against every rule and bit of common sense, I decided to investigate. I waited until everyone was asleep, then grabbed a flashlight and headed up the trail. The forest was alive with sounds: owls hooting, branches creaking, small animals rustling through the underbrush. But underneath it all, there was something else. A voice, faint and distant, but definitely human. "Help me. Please. I'm lost." It was coming from the direction of the cabin. My rational mind screamed at me to turn back, but something compelled me forward. The voice was so desperate, so plaintive, if someone was really in trouble up there. The cabin sat in a small clearing, exactly as Jake had described. It was old, but not falling apart, with boarded windows and a heavy wooden door. The voice was definitely coming from inside. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone in there?" The voice stopped abruptly. Then, after a moment, "Oh, thank God. I'm trapped in here. Can you help me get out?" It was a young woman's voice, probably around my age. She sounded terrified. "What happened? How did you get trapped?" "I was hiking and I fell through the floorboards. My leg is hurt and I can't climb back up. Please, I've been here for hours." I approached the door and tried the handle. It was locked, but the wood around the latch was old and rotten. With a little force, I managed to break it open. The interior was pitch black. I shone my flashlight around, seeing old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. There was a hole in the floor near the back wall, just like she'd described. "I'm down here," the voice called from the hole. "Be careful, the floorboards are really unstable." I approached slowly, testing each step. When I reached the hole, I pointed my flashlight down. There was no one there. Just a dirt floor about 6 feet down, covered in leaves and debris. No injured hiker, no signs that anyone had been there recently. "Hello," I called down. "Where are you?" The voice came from right behind me. "I'm right here." I spun around, heart hammering, but the cabin was empty. The voice had been so close, like someone was standing right next to me. That's when I noticed the photographs. They were scattered across an old desk, dozens of them, all black and white. Photos of Camp Whispering Pines from what looked like the 1960s or 70s. Kids swimming in the lake, sitting around campfires, hiking on trails I recognized. In several of the photos, I could see a young woman who looked about 19 or 20. She was always in the background, never the focus, but she appeared in picture after picture. She had long dark hair and was wearing what looked like a counselor's uniform. At the bottom of one photo, in faded ink, someone had written, "Sarah Mills, 1971. I grabbed the photos and ran back to camp, my mind racing. The next morning, I cornered Mrs. Rodriguez in her office. "Who is Sarah Mills?" I demanded, showing her the photographs. Her face went white. "Where did you get these?" "The cabin. Mrs. Rodriguez. Who is she?" She sat down heavily in her chair. "Sarah Mills was a counselor here in 1971. She disappeared during the summer session. They found her body in the lake 2 weeks later. The investigation concluded she'd fallen in during a night hike and drowned. But why would she?" "There's more." Mrs. Rodriguez's voice was barely above a whisper. "Before she died, 3 campers went missing. They were all found on the North Trail, claiming they'd heard a woman calling for help. The last one they found was Sarah herself. She'd gone up there to investigate, just like you did. I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. You think she's trying to get help? That she's still here? I think she's trying to save the children from making the same mistake she did. She calls them away from camp, away from the danger, but she doesn't realize she's become the danger. That afternoon, we evacuated the camp. Mrs. Rodriguez told the parents there had been a facility issue that required immediate closure. Most of the families were understanding, though disappointed. As I loaded my bags into my car, I looked back at the forest one last time. The trees were swaying in the wind, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard it again. That desperate, pleading voice carried on the breeze. "Help me, I'm lost." Camp Whispering Pines closed permanently that fall. Mrs. Rodriguez said she couldn't risk it happening again. I heard later that the old ranger station was demolished, though some locals claimed you could still hear crying in the woods on quiet nights. I never worked at a summer camp again, but sometimes when I'm hiking in the mountains and the wind picks up just right, I think I can still hear Sarah Mills calling out, trying to save children from a danger she doesn't understand she's become.